It's ClandesTime.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to ClandesTime. I am your host, Tom Secker, coming to you from the grassy knolls of North Yorkshire, and this is episode 54, Why I Hate the Media. Before we get started today, I'd just like to point out to everyone that I have revamped and reworked the way that you can subscribe to and follow my work, including ClandesTime. I know that many of you already subscribe to this show via RSS feed or via iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, whatever, but I've also set up email subscriptions for those of you who want that. If you go to spyculture.com, you'll see a little box in the bottom right saying follow, and if you click on that, you'll get a pop-up where you can enter your email address to get all of the latest posts, including ClandesTime, delivered to your inbox. If you go to spyculture.com/follow, I have set up a page where you can also put in your email address and choose to either get all of the posts on the site, including articles, documents, and so on, or you can choose to just get ClandesTime. The page also has links to the RSS feed for the site, or again, just for ClandesTime. I'm also uploading the video versions of ClandesTime to my Vimeo channel, my Vimeo account, so there are RSS feeds for that too, either for the whole channel or again just for the ClandesTime video versions. And on that page there are also links so you can subscribe via iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher and all of that. I'm also going to stop putting the preview clips for my other show, Disinfo Wars, which I do for subscribers to boilingfrogspost.com. I'm going to stop putting them into the ClandesTime feed. I will still be posting them to Spy Culture, but they'll go in the blog section, so sign up to the full site feed or the full site email to get them from now on. Of course, if you want the full episodes of Disinfo Wars, then you'll have to sign up for a Boiling Frogs Post subscriber account, which I can recommend both as a source of very good media, but also as a way of supporting me in this work. But so, to today's topic. I was going to do this episode on an investigative subject of some sort, as I mentioned at the end of the last show, but I'm still thinking over what I make of these two big cases that I mentioned, the murder of Marilyn Monroe and the gunpowder plot. And also, recent experiences made me think it would be fun to do one on my dealings with the media, both the mainstream and the alternative. As those of you who follow my site and follow my work will know, I recently acquired over 1,600 pages of new material from the Pentagon's Entertainment Liaison Offices, 1,400 pages from the US Army's office, and another 200 pages from the Air Force's office. This is the largest and most up-to-date release of material ever, at least as far as I know, and of course is part of my ongoing Fun with FOIA project that has yielded some quite remarkable results already and is by no means finished. Those of you who don't know what I'm talking about should check into spyculture.com and in particular episode 25 of ClandesTime, Fun with FOIA, where I talk about the DoD film list that I obtained last year. These latest documents that I got came as a result of a fresh request that I put in, which came as a consequence of discussions with Matt Alford, an academic who specialises in this field, who I've become quite good friends with in recent months. We were batting around ideas for what new material we could try to get, and because we already knew that these entertainment liaison offices keep regular reports of their activities, we decided that was the best bet for a successful FOIA request. We knew that these reports existed because I found some older versions of them from around 2004-2006 on the website governmentattic.org, and of course I republished them on Spy Culture, and links will be in the show notes as per usual. So we thought it was worth trying to get more up-to-date versions of these same reports. We agreed to split the costs, if there were any, for reproduction of documents and so on, and that whatever came back would be both of ours to do with as we saw fit. I actually put in the requests, but that was the result of a process involving Matt and myself. I just want to clarify that. So I put in the requests to the Army, Navy, Air Force and Marines, linking to the original older documents and asking for all such reports from 2006 up to the present day. The Air Force got back first, saying they only had reports from 2013 and 2014, and that their 2015 reports weren't available due to ongoing computer malfunctions in their Hollywood office. At that time, they only released the 2013 reports to me. I then asked them for the 2014 reports, and they made those available to me much more recently. A few weeks after the Air Force's initial response, the Army responded to my request, forwarding about 5 years of reports from March 2010 to April 2015. And that is the 1,400 pages. Of course, I immediately shared these with Matt, and after announcing this FOIA success at a conference, he then set about trying to get the mainstream media interested. The documents reveal not just the DoD's involvement in massive blockbuster films like Superman and Godzilla and Transformers, but also tons of TV shows, absolutely tons. Mostly reality TV dross like American Idol and Miss America, Big Kitchens, Cupcake Wars, Ice Road Truckers, so that's not half bad. Undercover Boss, X Factor, so on and so forth, you get the idea. Just from the Army documents, it is clear that they are involved in as many as 30 or 40 shows simultaneously, and when you add in the other 5 branches of the military, the Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard and the National Guard, you can probably double that number. Though there will be a lot of crossover, I think, different branches of the DoD working on the same film or TV show at the same time. So this is enormous, and we can prove it. However, what is conspicuously absent from these 1,600 pages is details of what kind of changes were made to these media products, i.e. what the DoD asked to have put in and taken out in exchange for their cooperation in the production. This is something that since 2002, when David Robb got some access to archives containing scripts and memos and so on, and he wrote a pretty scathing book about the DoD's entertainment offices, since then, any such details of changes have been kept under wraps. So they're happy for us to know that this is going on, and is on a huge scale, and even what it is that the DoD offer to entertainment producers. But what we don't know is what those producers have to compromise or sacrifice from their productions in order to secure DoD support. I will say that despite this censorship, we can make some pretty good, educated guesses, but nonetheless, concrete examples and evidence are hard to come by, if not overtly censored. So this is what Matt Alford took to several newspapers to try to get them to do an article on it, and after some pretty titanic efforts on his part, he managed to get the Mirror to do a piece that went out on Sunday the 12th of July. It is a pretty good piece, obviously rather tabloid, but it still makes some good basic points that need making. It does not, however, mention my name. It mentions the 1,400-page military document, but for whatever reason, neglected to include my name alongside Matt's as those responsible for obtaining this new information. To be honest, that is disappointing, but exactly what I expected. Matt told them about this explicitly, but they just want a name to stick in the article, and Matt's the one with the doctorate, and of course he was the guy that they were talking to, so they just put his name in the article. I would have liked to get the credit, but, like I say, this did not come as a surprise to me. So that's media experience number 1. Not being mentioned in an article that really should have mentioned me. I was a bit pissed off when it happened, but that's done now. Media experience number 2. While all of this was going on, I was also dealing with a journalist from the Huffington Post, who contacted me because of the 7/7 anniversary. He was polite and relatively straightforward, like most media people are when they want something from you, but it quickly turned bad. He started out asking me a series of questions which I answered completely honestly, so when he asked who, on balance, did I think was responsible for 7/7, I told him that my best guess was the Gladio network. 7/7 always struck me as a Gladio-type operation, or at least it did when I looked into it properly and did a bit of lateral thinking. He also asked, what aspects of the official narrative do you find least convincing? So I answered, the ISC reports and the inquest testimony of Witness G as to what MI5 knew and when, and what they were doing in the years before 7/7. That is a complex story, but basically they've told a radically different version every time someone has asked them the question. Why anyone would believe them anymore is beyond me. That's me quoting myself, so you get an impression of our exchange, I'm sure. It was all going well for a while. The point at which it turned bad was when he sent me a piece of research that he'd been reading, and this came from a forthcoming journal paper by a couple of Cambridge academics called Rolf Fredheim and Hugo Drocon. They are working on the Conspiracy and Democracy project, which even has its own YouTube channel, so I will let Mr. Hugo Drocon explain it in his own words. This is only a few minutes long.
Okay, so I suppose there are three strands in the way I want to approach this project. One of them has to do with the history of political thought, the other has to do with intellectual history, and the third has to do more with political theory. In the history of political thought strand, the idea is to look at the 20th century and understandings of conspiracy over the course of the 20th century, specifically how they shift. They seem to shift in the early course of the 20th century. Conspiracies tend to be located more in the mass of the people and in small subversive groups who are going to take over and overthrow the old established elite. And this seems to shift over the course of the 20th century, where instead of being groups within the mass, subversive groups within the mass, it's government itself and democracy itself that seem to be a conspiracy against the people. So I want to explore how that shift happens. And my inclination is to think that perhaps in terms of political thought, this shift happens with in the kind of mid-20th century, or slightly earlier perhaps, with people like Robert Michael's study of political parties, where he looks at the social democrats in Germany who claim to be ruling in a democratic manner, in which if they were to take over then in Germany, they would also rule in a democratic manner. And he studies this and it's like, no, there's actually an iron law of oligarchy. So one of the first questions I want to ask then is, well, is that one of the ways we get the shift? And as part of the project, which we say that we'd work in a kind of collaboration with David Runciman, is to analyze these people like Robert Michaels, Moscar and Pareto, and see whether we can understand their theories of elite democracy as something like a conspiracy. So that's the first strand I think I would like to investigate within the project. The second strand has to do with intellectual history, and this is something Alfred and I said we'd try to work on together to try to develop something like a genealogy of conspiracy theory. And what's meant by that, I think the kind of thought is sparked by a remark by Bruno Latour, who says that, well, he finds it very hard to make a distinction between critical theory and conspiracy theory today, in a way that conspiracy theory has kind of vulgarized critical theory, but used many of the same tools. So it's about debunking the kind of official line and seeing what's behind it. And there seems to be an interesting parallel there. And so the idea is to try to trace that back and see what the intellectual influences that come into conspiracy theory, which obviously take on a slightly vulgarized form. But there may be a link with that conspiracy theory with the broader project of enlightenment and the critique of enlightenment. So I think both of us want to explore that to see that we hope drawing kind of some kind of intellectual history of conspiracy theory will hopefully shed light on conspiracy theory and make us better understand it. And I think the other element of that also has to do with the link between religion and conspiracy theory, which is what Hofstadter in his classic study of the paranoid style in American politics seems to point towards, where people who see the world in black and white or in good and evil are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories than those who don't. And I suppose there's an element of one way of trying to master the world. If one sees things in black and white, then it's easier to understand the world rather than actually taking it as being pretty arbitrary and contingent, etc. So those are the two strands in terms of the genealogy of conspiracy theory that Alfred and I will collaborate on working on. The final strand then has to do with political theory, and it's more to do with the constitutive links then between conspiracy theory and democracy. And it's often the case we think of conspiracy theory as kind of undermining the democratic process. But I kind of have a hunch that maybe actually it serves a specific role within democracy in the way that in the past societies, religion used to play a certain role. So if there was a famine or if there was a loss of war and the government could no longer explain why that was the case, people took refuge in the sense that it was saying, oh, this is God and we didn't behave in the right manner. And I do wonder whether there's a kind of parallel in the way conspiracy theories are thought of specifically within a democratic regime, because a democratic regime, the people are supposed to rule and thus the question becomes, well, if we've voted, we've elected these kind of politicians on this platform, why is it the case that this doesn't come about in the way that we want it to come about? And one way of kind of explaining that and reconciling oneself with the democratic system in a certain way to say, well, there's actually this world elite, this new world order, which means that we cannot have exactly what we want. But that's one way of explaining why the desires of the people that are supposed to be expressed through the democratic regime do not come through in the way that they would want them to come through. So that's one element I want to look at. The other element, which has come out in some of the recent work and some of the recent articles I've been looking at, is this idea of the link between conspiracy theories and relationship to authority. So one of these papers I was reading recently was arguing that people are more likely to believe in contradictory conspiracy theories than in the official line. So the examples were Diana. People were more likely to believe that both it was a plot, by secret services, but also that she may still be alive, rather than the official line of them saying, oh, it was a car crash. So they're more likely to believe contradictory conspiracy theories than the official line. And this has to do with a link with the kind of rejection of authority. And I think there's quite a strong link between this kind of rejection of authority and democracy, because you think of rejection of authority as being part of the democratic mindset. You do not believe what authority says because you believe that it's the people who really know what the truth is. So I think there's a constitutive link there that I want to explore. And the other side of it has to do with democracies. Obviously, there's kind of much more information available, so you can tell your own story, which is going to be different than the story that the government or the state or whatever may be telling you. But I think this is part of the rejection of authority, which I'm interested in trying to study. The final point then is just to try to draw a comparison between the modern relationship between democracy and conspiracy theory, and perhaps the ancient understanding of democracy and also conspiracy. And the hunch is that maybe it's the case that ancient democracy is the first regime that actually legitimizes and legalizes conspiracy as a mode of doing politics. You have all these different groups within the assemblies and they're kind of conspiring against one another to have power. And that's kind of legalized and formalized in a way that beforehand, if you're trying to overthrow the tyrant, then it always looks like an illegal conspiracy. And I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. And I want to use that then as a counterpoint to try to understand modern democracy and its relationship to conspiracy theory.
So that all sounds very highbrow and rather abstract, but nonetheless quite interesting and not really something I have any objection to. I think that the rise of conspiracy thinking in the 20th century is a very important historical phenomenon and very much worthy of study. However, the blog by these two academics from their site conspiracyandemocracy.org that was sent to me by the HuffPost journalist was titled, "Are Conspiracy Theories for Total Losers?" He asked me, the HuffPost journalist asked me, if I considered myself a conspiracy theorist, and then told me that I was one, and asked me whether I thought this research applied to me. Basically, he sent me an email asking me if I thought I was a total loser because a couple of Cambridge ivory tower shitwits say that I am. Strip away all the extraneous stuff, and that's what he was saying. So you can imagine my response. I was not a happy bunny. But you don't have to imagine it, because I'm going to read it to you. Hi, Jack. Okay, this is where I suspected you were going with this. Yet another piece about how conspiracy theorists are all the same and blah blah blah. Seriously, if that's the sort of piece you're writing, then keep my name out of it. I want nothing to do with a dialogue that's so willfully stupid and childish. I mean, what would you think if someone sent you a link to a paper saying people like you are all losers, and asking you what your opinion of it was? You'd probably think that person was a bit of a troll, wouldn't you? Let's get down to brass tacks here. That research is a load of vague, insulting crap. It basically assumes that all conspiracy theories have the same truth value, i.e. that they are all false, and that belief in them is some sort of mental illness. That's just pathetic. It's like when atheists try to claim that all religious belief is exactly the same, and that all religious people are mentally deficient. I'm basically an atheist, but I still recognize that for the trash that it is. For example, the theory that JFK was assassinated by a conspiracy rather than a single assassin is the conclusion of the House Select Committee on Assassinations back in the 1970s. Are all the members of that committee mentally deficient conspiracy theorists? Are they all alienated from politics? Or were they people who followed the facts and concluded what was reasonable based on what they found? How about the Iraq War? If I'd told you back in 2002 that there was a secret cabal of spin doctors inside the Ministry of Defense who were writing the intelligence assessments on Iraq's WMD program and using that to deceive the public, then I would have been called a conspiracy theorist. But now I can show you drafts of dossiers, emails and memos that prove that this was the case. No doubt some would still call me a conspiracy theorist, in spite of conclusive evidence to the contrary. Nonetheless, I am a conspiracy theorist, but I'm also a skeptic who recognizes that an awful lot of conspiracy theories are complete nonsense. The ideas that no one died in the Boston Marathon bombing, or that the United Nations is covering up the fact that the world is flat, or that Michelle Obama is secretly a man, these are all insane to me. Lumping me in with people like that is seriously insulting, which is exactly what this research is doing. If it is your intention to discuss things in these sorts of terms, then I do not want my name mentioned, because it's a load of misleading bullshit that has nothing to do with me. As to whether I suffer from complete political exclusion, no doubt the latest metaphor for non-violent extremism, no, I don't. I am very politically engaged. I even voted at the recent election, as I have done in every general election since I turned 18. No doubt an awful lot of people who do believe conspiracy theories do feel excluded from the political system, but to reduce belief in all conspiracy theories, whether true or not, whether reasonable or not, to this explanatory factor, is intellectually and morally bankrupt. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. If that is the sort of article you are writing, then keep me out of it. The only thing that informs my thinking about 7/7 is the evidence. Perhaps if you spent less time reading horseshit research by simpletons and actually, watched my films and read my book to find out what evidence I'm talking about, then you'd realize that. You've seriously insulted me by dragging this dialogue down to this level. I spent years reconstructing the timeline of MI5's lies about this, from their own publicly available documents. But you're not interested in that. You're interested in whether I feel alienated from politics and whether that's why I believe this sort of thing. That's pretty shameful behaviour on your part. Regards, Tom. After a little bit more back and forth, I made it clear to him that there was no way I was going to allow my name or words to be used in what was clearly another generic conspiracy debunking article. He tried to get me to change my mind, but obviously I was resolute. Then the article came out, and it was basically a recycling of an old Guardian article that was written several years ago now. Basically, a Guardian journalist named Mark Honigsbaum went to Edgware Road on the morning of 7/7 and started interviewing witnesses, and then filed this report over the phone.
This is Mark Honigsbaum reporting from the London Hilton Hotel opposite Edgware Road station, where we believe there was an explosion this morning under the carriage of a train. I've been speaking to survivors all morning. People were evacuated, first of all, to Marks and Spencer's beside the underground, and then across the road to the London Hilton, where there are some people in very, very bad injuries. There was a woman who got cuts and burns to her face and is being wrapped from head to neck in bandages. There's people with blood cuts. But, I mean, the main thing is people are extremely shook up still. What seems to have happened is that sometime around 9:30 this morning, passengers in a train from Edgware Road travelling to Paddington, they'd just left Edgware Road station when suddenly they felt they heard a massive explosion. And some passengers described how the tiles, the covers on the floor of the train suddenly flew up, raised up. And
Honigsbaum later retracted this, saying he had interviewed other witnesses who said that the explosion came from inside the carriage. However, by that point the report was out, and being used by InfoWars and the rest as definitive proof that the explosions came from under the trains, and so couldn't have been suicide bombings. Honigsbaum later wrote an article explaining all this, and tried to debunk all alternative views of 7/7 in the process. He also appeared in the 2008 TV special Conspiracy, Who Really Runs the World, which is the shittest, lamest piece of conspiracy debunking you will ever see in your life. And I'll play you a clip from that show, and remember that this is now 7 years old.
It's not just 9/11 that has conspiracy theories. Only 4 years after the Twin Towers were brought down in New York, London had its own attack to contend with.
This clearly was a callous attack on purely innocent members of the public.
Whatever they do, it is our determination that they will never succeed in destroying what we hold dear in this country.
Some people believe the attack was nothing to do with terrorists.
I think that Tony Blair could well have organised the 7/7 bombings.
Possibly Tony Blair might have known about them and might not have been able to prevent them.
Yeah, I think that Tony Blair would be more likely to be involved with the 7/7 bombs.
I think Osama bin Laden is more responsible for the London bombings than Tony Blair, although I wouldn't put the blame fully on him.
I don't think there are any conspiracies about the London bombings at all. I think they're out-and-out terrorist attacks.
On July the 7th, 2005, Rachel North thought she was heading for just another day at work. "30 miles away, 4 men had already set out on a very different sort of journey.
Mind doors, please.
Minutes after Rachel's train left King's Cross Station, a bomb exploded. Rachel was only a few feet away.
One minute I was on the train, the next minute everything had gone black. I was sort of starting to piece it together that the smell I could smell was explosives, that the smoke was in the carriage, and that what had thrown me to the floor had been an absolutely enormous force. And I think I probably did start to work out then that there had been some kind of explosion.
Above ground, London was in chaos. 3 trains had been blown up, but buried deep in tunnels it was not clear how. At Edgware Road Station, Guardian journalist Mark Honigsbaum was one of the first reporters responsible for trying to piece together what had happened.
When I arrived, it was total confusion. I could tell that, something major had happened here, but we didn't think there would be necessarily a bomb blast. We just didn't know. So I started interviewing survivors and asking them, what they saw, what they experienced on the train. One of the witnesses I interviewed was a woman who'd been on the train, who described how she, at the moment of the blast, the tiles on the carriage in which she was travelling appeared to raise up, fly up. She used a phrase like that. This is what she experienced, or what appeared to happen to her.
If the floor had flown up, then perhaps the explosions were caused by some accident outside the train. Mark filed an audio report for the Guardian website, including the eyewitness's account of the train floor rising up. Then, in Tavistock Square, a bomb ripped a double-decker bus apart. Suddenly it was clear that the explosions on the Underground were no accident. But by now it was too late. Mark's initial report was all over the internet, feeding the conspiracists' theory that the explosions might have been outside the train.
That report took on a life of its own. It was picked up by various conspiracy sites. So at that point I became quite disturbed that my report was being used in this way. But there wasn't a lot I could do because it was out there on the internet. I couldn't just cancel it. People had copied it.
So then, in 2015, this HuffPost prick decides to write an article simply rehashing and repeating all of this, adding absolutely nothing new to the discussion. The point he misses is that aside from the ludicrous logic of this one piece of evidence is weak, therefore all conspiracy theories about 7/7 are nonsense, aside from that, there are dozens of other accounts, indeed the majority of 7/7 witness reports from the trains, saying that the explosion came from through the floor or from under the carriages. I featured these in my first film and in my book. So even Honigsbaum's basic point is a load of nonsense. Nonetheless, the Huffington Post published this highly unoriginal article, even referring somewhat obliquely to me, though not mentioning my name or quoting me directly. The final article, which once again will be linked up in the show notes, says, "The Huffington Post UK spoke to one 7/7 conspiracy theorist, who believes a deep state network including elements of MI5 and the Metropolitan Police colluded to carry out the attack." I assume he meant attacks. He declined to be named or quoted, but strongly dismissed the Cambridge research and said that he was actively engaged in mainstream politics and voting. So, I got half mentioned in this terrible Huffington Post article which I wanted nothing to do with, but didn't get mentioned by the Mirror in an article that was, in part, based on my original FOIA work. This is the mainstream media in a nutshell. They want people like me to give them stuff, because they can't really be asked to do the work themselves, but they don't want to give credit for original research, and on the flip side want to use me as an example of something that I'm not. Getting named in connection with genuine research on subjects of genuine importance is all but impossible. This is why I hate the mainstream media, and these experiences echo all of my previous experiences, where I was either expected to give them gold-quality research for nothing, not even getting the credit, or I was expected to fulfill the role of the conspiracy fanatic. If I'm not prepared to do one of those two things, then they basically don't give a toss. To reiterate again, none of this is particularly surprising me. I've come to expect this. And the next part isn't surprising either, but if anything, it pisses me off even more. Media experience number 3. When the Mirror published their story, without my name, it was picked up by some alternative outlets, one of which is called countercurrentnews.com. And their article is clearly based on my own piece, biggest ever FOIA release from Pentagon's Entertainment Liaison Office, which I published a few hours after the Mirror's piece came out, but before the Countercurrent News piece. And they basically ripped off my article, and the evidence for this is, to my mind, absolutely conclusive. They emphasize the scale of the Pentagon's involvement in entertainment media, as I do in my article. They link to the DoD film list as an example of this large-scale involvement, as I do in my article, but as no one else did before that. They even link to the old documents from the Entertainment Liaison Offices, the ones from 2004 to 6 obtained by governmentattic.org, which again I did in my article. Countercurrent News says that these are the new documents, the ones referred to by the Mirror, which they aren't. So clearly the person writing this article does not have a sodding clue what's going on. But all of this confirms that they just ripped off my work. And yet, they too do not mention my name. They mention Matt, and attribute the FOIA documents to him, the wrong ones, but still, but no mention of me. Despite linking to documents on my site 3 times in this one article, so they must have read my article and know that they are lying and misleading their readers in omitting my role in all of this. And now it's great that they're promoting Matt. He's a very cool guy doing some very interesting and important work, who I'm happy and proud to be working with. No issue with that at all. Matt was an integral part of the process by which these documents were released. But to rip off someone's work without attribution, and to do so in a way that makes it fucking obvious that that's what they're doing, is probably worse, and definitely at least as bad as my treatment at the hands of the Mirror and the Huffington Post. What particularly pisses me off about all of this is that Countercurrent News, as the name suggests, presents itself as an alternative news media site, and yet they treated me and my original work with even less respect than the mainstream media did. So, writer and editor of Countercurrent News, whoever you are, fuck you with bells and sausages on, because you have totally, without shame, ripped off someone else's work and not given them the credit for it. And even if the 1% chance that they did this without realizing it, which is possible given that they linked to the wrong fucking documents, even if that small chance is true, then they are utterly stupid. And I have contacted them to point this out, politely at first, and then more directly, and they have not got back to me or corrected the piece, so they clearly don't care. This article from Countercurrent News was then picked up by Global Research, the fake alt media site run by the obvious KGB agent Michel Chossudovsky. And they didn't care that they were attributing information wrongly, they didn't care that they were linking to the wrong documents. They just wanted another bit of conspiracy-themed clickbait to fill up their website. I should be clear here, full disclosure. I hate Global Research and I hate Michel Chossudovsky. I used to publish my articles there, and sometimes they proved immensely popular, like my WTC 93 piece. But then Chossudovsky blackballed me for daring to suggest that the Russian secret services were guilty of false flag terrorism. Admittedly, the specific case I was talking about, the Boston Marathon bombing, I no longer feel is likely to have involved the KGB. But all I did was float the idea as a hypothesis in the days following the bombing. Nonetheless, even suggesting that was far too much for Chossudovsky, who publicly accused me of being a CIA disinformation agent. So, Chossudovsky, fuck you too, with bells and meatballs on. What is especially amusing, and especially indicative of Chossudovsky's editorial policy, is that every page on Global Research contains the following disclaimer. The contents of this article are of sole responsibility of the authors. The Centre for Research on Globalization will not be responsible for any inaccurate or incorrect statement in this article. As such, Global Research take no responsibility for publishing things that aren't true, and make no guarantee of truth or accuracy in their output. Put another way, they simply do not care if the stuff that they put on their site is true. They just don't care. I care, which is why I go to great pains to publish my source documents and other source material completely for free via my website or Vimeo channel or however. I don't like misleading people. I don't like making mistakes and saying or writing things that aren't true. Every once in a while it happens, but I don't need a disclaimer on my site because 99.9% of what's on spyculture.com is absolutely true and rigorously well researched. As a result, I get a lot less traffic than conspiracy clickbait sites like Global Research, and I'm guessing I get less traffic than misleading faux journalism sites like Countercurrent News. The Global Research story, the one with the wrong links to the wrong documents in, was then picked up by others, including From the Trenches World Report, no doubt produced from someone's basement and reporting only on things that other people have already reported on, and CollectivelyConscious.net, which says it is a community-powered, community-verified alternative media multimedia aggregation service for global citizens. Well, their community failed to verify anything with me or with Matt, so that's a load of bollocks. And of all the sites that picked up this mistaken article, the one with the incorrect links to old documents in, the one with the best name is cultureofawareness.com. This is what the alt media has become. Some very vague, wishy-washy, wakey people-uppy with vaguely truthy stories circle jerk where no one actually does proper research, let alone original proper research. And the reason why all of this pisses me off so much is not because I'm driven by getting lots of credit for my work. I'm not. Indeed, if I was, then I would do a lot more to raise my public profile and popularize my stuff, and I'm sure I could be reasonably successful at that. The reason it pisses me off is that both the mainstream and the alternative media, but especially the alternative media, go to great pains to paint themselves in the colours of responsibility and accuracy and truth. The reality, the grim reality, attested to by almost every experience that I've had and millions of experiences that millions of others have had, is that neither the mainstream nor the alternative can get a fucking story straight. When you're focused on driving as much traffic as possible to your site, which both the mainstream and alternative media are, then accuracy is a secondary consideration. To paraphrase a popular aphorism, the first casualty in the info war is truth. And that applies across the mainstream and alternative media, which is why I hate the media. Now, I know some of you will be thinking of the Jello Biafra quote, "Don't hate the media, become the media." And I have two things to say about that. Firstly, most of the people who quote that are making vague, wishy-washy, slightly Nazi media, some of them without even realizing that's the agenda that they are pushing, so the quote in itself doesn't give me an awful lot of cause for hope. And the other thing is that I both hate the media and produce media. It is possible to do both at once. I would like to finish this episode on a happier note, so I will say that the good folks over at Reddit, specifically those on the conspiracy subreddit, managed to figure out pretty quickly which the correct documents were and to attribute them correctly. So while it might seem that the world is full of attention-seeking idiots with no interest in the truth, and it is, there are at least some people out there who are intelligent, reflective, and care about important things. Also, MovieGuide.org picked up on my article and reported it properly, and I am starting to see a few others too. I will of course implore all of you listening to have a look at these 1,600 pages of new material. To break it down, these are activity reports from the propaganda office of the largest, most powerful and aggressive military force in human history. That's not nothing. That's very much something, and something worthy of your attention. So, if you are the type who likes reading, then download the reports yourself and have a look-see at what they contain. I'm not saying read every last word of over 1,000 pages of government files. That is the sort of thing that only obsessive researchers like me are going to do, and I accept that. But have a scan through and see what you find, because every person who has seen these so far has spotted something different in them. And if you spot something you feel is interesting or significant, drop me an email and let me know, and I'll either write about it or talk about it in a future episode. For those of you who aren't big readers, share these links around with anyone you think might be interested in them, especially alt media outlets who might report on them properly and thus restore some of my truly shattered faith that the alt media is willing and capable of doing things well. So, whoever else's podcasts that you listen to, whoever else's websites you visit and read, drop them a line and include a link to the article I posted that contains the documents themselves. Much more so than buying a book or DVD or download, though that would be great as well. But if you really want to support my work, then don't let this story die on the vine, and don't let the misleading coverage that is already out there be all that there is. Indeed, if you write blogs or run a website yourself, then please do write a piece, even if it's only short, letting people know about this. Because while a lot of people don't give a fuck, and I know that and kind of just have to live with it, a lot of people would be truly shocked at the vast scale of the DoD's involvement in the entertainment industry, if only they knew about it. Now, thanks to Matt and myself, we have the evidence to show people, so let's show it to people and see what kind of reaction it stirs up. And on that note, I think I'll finish there. I promise that more episodes are coming soon, so please do remember to subscribe via email or RSS feed, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever you prefer, because there are some exciting shows in the pipeline. I might even be revisiting the Bolshevik Revolution. As always, I am Tom Secker of SpyCulture.com, and you've been listening to ClandesTime, so please do join me again soon for another episode, and in the meantime, thanks for listening, and take care.
Zengodol, Argentinától Peruig, tudják már, marihuana, csa-csa-csa. Salvador, Rosáriótól Andesig, táncolják, marihuana, csa-csa-csa. Marihuana, 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 csodás dallam, marihuana, csodás ritmus, marihuana, 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 csap-csap. Salvador, Rosáriótól Andesig, sok ez jár, marihuana, csap-csap-csap. Marihuana, marihuana, csap-csap. Csodás dallam, marihuana, csodás ritmus, marihuana, 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 csap-csap. marihuana,
csodás ritmus,
marihuana,
marihuana,
marihuana, csak.
Salvador Rosario-tól landezik, csak ez jár, marihuana, csak.
Cha-cha-cha.